Good morning and welcome to Cranleigh School Abu Dhabi. My name is Liz Hewitt and we are coming live today from Abu Dhabi to talk about a really important issue. Now, today is an impromptu session that we didn't plan at the beginning of this year, unlike the rest of my talks, but today's talk has come about after a series of emails and phone calls and discussions in the corridors around a really important topic that I know is very close to a lot of our parents' hearts right now. So the objective of today is to look at some of the research around the idea of a smartphone-free childhood. Now, every time I say that, I trip over my words, so I do apologise if I get that wrong. But really why we're here today is not to be experts. You know, we're not coming to tell parents what to do or how to do it. I am blessed today to be joined with a speaker from the UK. She's going to join us live in a few moments, and she's going to be talking to us about the research. Really the aim of this, there's been a lot of things out there, articles, there's a book called The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt that we have to mention. But what Kate's going to do today is kind of take all of that and put it down into like half an hour of what do parents really need to know about this movement and what is going on around the world. I'm also going to be joined by Mr. James. Stephen James is our assistant head teacher pastoral for the prep school, and he whilst he's a very busy man, we've had a lot of conversations around this topic, how we can prevent instead of just dealing with issues, and today is really focused on that prevention of harm and safeguarding our children. So I will bring them in a moment. I did just want to say that today's talk is for parents. If you do have children listening, there may be things that are mentioned today that we wouldn't talk about with your children, some of the mental health areas. So just a disclaimer there. And also, this is coming really from a place of non-judgment. We are all coming at this, myself, Kate and Stephen, we're all parents. We have differing range of ages of children, and I think it's really important to know that there's nothing judgmental about this. This is coming from a place of hope that we can work together as a community to try to keep our children healthy and safe. So I'm just going to bring Mr. James in first of all. I know Mr. James is new to this platform, but it's lovely to see you here today, Stephen.
Good morning, Liz, and thank you for having me as part of the talk this morning. It definitely is something that we have been discussing, and it's something which is really imperative to be addressing because we're seeing it creep into our prep school. We're seeing some behavior which is really concerning throughout the prep school from years 3 to year 8. So I'm really looking forward to tackling this head on this morning and talking through some of what we're seeing in the prep school with yourself, but also with Kate when she joins us.
Perfect. And I do think it's important as well. I always put my email on there instead of my name. If you do have any emails that you would like to send, any questions, I will take those anonymously. I'll be checking as I go through. If you do want to put something onto the comments on either of the platforms that we're live on now, then again, please do that. I am just waiting for some slides to come through. We've had a little bit of a technical issue, but they will be coming any moment, I believe. So I'm going to welcome Kate into the call. And I'm just going to say this, let's be really honest here. Most of our parenting comes from how we were parented. I mean, that pretty much we do what we saw, right? Our parents didn't have smartphones. So I really want to, put that out there as a, I said there's no judgment, but also this is, I mentioned my last talk, it is a brave new world, but it's also a really scary world that we're raising our children into. And I think it's really worth saying that we're not here to vilify technology. Our children are going to use technology. We do use technology in school, and I'm pretty attached to this thing, and I think that's also something to highlight as well, is that, we have a huge role to play as parents in how we role model this. But yeah, just to really be clear on what we're trying to achieve here is that if you're listening to this, whether it's live or whether it's, listening afterwards with a cup of tea at any point in the future, just be aware of that this is we're trying to create a safe space here to open up a dialogue around what we can do as a school to really support you as parents as we move towards this. So I'm going to welcome Kate into the call, and she's just going to introduce herself, tell us a little bit about her background. She has been working in this field for quite a number of years, but I'm just going to let her tell you herself. Hi, Kate. Good morning.
Hello, good morning. It's an absolute pleasure to be here this morning. I think I did a very similar talk, I think it was last year, but it was actually about 5 o'clock in the morning. So this is actually a bit more civilized for me from the UK. As Liz mentioned this morning, this is a really, really hot topic at the moment. It has really caught fire in the UK at the moment. And there's huge amounts of conversations that are happening about how we can move forward, how we can change, and what we can actually do to make amends to where we are currently at. So a bit about myself. So I have been running IDYOU for about 6.5 years. So I go into both private schools and state schools across the UK, delivering wellbeing workshops. So I'm really in schools, on the ground, listening to kids, and really hearing the impact of things that have happened to them. I'm also a presenter for the RAP Foundation, which stands for Raising Awareness and Prevention. So I spend a lot of my time speaking to young people across lots of different subjects. At the moment, I would say the key topic that most schools are interested in is how we navigate this tech space, and how as parents we can keep our children safe, and how we can be realistic with moving forward. So as Liz mentioned, this is a space where we want to ignite hope. It's not all doom and gloom. And I really appreciate, as a mother of 3, how hard it is to get this right. There is huge amounts of peer pressure from all angles. My eldest is in year 5, and currently he's one of the only kids in his class that doesn't have a smartphone. So I am the worst mother ever. And I'm repeatedly told that most days. So I really understand how difficult this is. So this is about supporting you guys, and I think Cranleigh are very, very on board with this subject, and I know they together collectively we want to make this easier for you guys to navigate. I very much believe in a 360 approach, so that would be including the children in this conversation, including parents in this conversation, and obviously including the school in this conversation, so everyone comes from the same angle, because otherwise there can be mixed messaging. So it's really important that we all kind of are open, if you like, with what we are talking about. So are my slides ready, Liz? They're not.
I'm just working them out. Give me a second. Kate, just while we sort that, let me just find them. We were just talking earlier. I mean, Kate and I met yesterday, and we were talking again just earlier about this whole idea of our children being guinea pigs. And I think I've just read something, actually. There is a WhatsApp group that's been set up, and I think there's an article shared in there really interesting about the voices of our children, and how actually that's something so important to listen to. Is what do our children say about this? I know they don't want to feel left out, but what will they say to us when they're in their 20s and they actually have had this childhood that's very different than our childhood, you know? And I think part of what we want to do today is to almost like pre-prepare us for those conversations of why did you let me have that? You know, why did you let me have that? The more ready we are.
Absolutely, and I think it's as I said, we're at a really pinnacle point in this, because I think what happened was when I first started delivering these kind of presentations, it massively fell on deaf ears, because many schools and parents said, you know, we've got to be embracing technology. You've got this all wrong. This is part of our, this is part of our new world. Obviously, children have to get on board with this, and people really didn't understand what the consequences were going to be of giving our children basically the internet in their pockets. And so there is a generation of kids who I believe have been slightly let down because we didn't have the research and we weren't necessarily on board with where we should be on board with. So we are in that interesting space. I think there's an amazing quote by a lady called Biban Kidran, who does a lot of campaigning in this space for 5 rights. And she simply says, there is no childhood online. And I use that in all my talks because it really, really resonates with this whole thing that actually, you know, once our children have seen something, once they have heard something, they can never unsee it or unhear it. And we only get one childhood. And I feel by giving those smartphones prematurely, potentially we are disallowing or not, you know, allowing our children to have those fundamentals areas of their childhood which they so need. So that is the key. That is the quote that I always use, and I use it to the kids as well. There is no childhood online. And I think from my work in schools, when I'm actually speaking to the kids, I would say by the time they get to year 9 and year 10, so that's they're 14, 15, I would say at least 85% of them will say that they are addicted to their phones. I'd say a further percentage of them, I'd say 75% of them will say it has made their life more complicated. And they wish that they didn't actually have access to what they have access to. Delving a bit deeper into their communications, their friendships, all of these aspects have been made much more difficult by having that smartphone. So this is where we are at. And it's as Liz says, this is an exciting point. And I really want this presentation to be an area that where there is hope, that where we can actually together see whether we can actually come up with some solutions. I think also it's really important to state that all families are different. Okay, everyone will have their own set of guidelines. Everyone has their own different way of managing their families. So this won't all look the same for everyone. And I think that's okay for us all to understand, because we can't expect that one rule fits all. Some of the things that I'm going to be talking about in this is just where we feel it could perhaps benefit you guys as parents, and also just giving you some statistics and some facts of actually where we are at. So
brilliant. Right, so I've got that in now. So
fantastic.
Stephen will talk about if there are any comments, if there's any private anonymous, because obviously this is not always something you want to talk about your own children. I can ask anything anonymously. Just drop me an email. My email's there on the screen, lhewitt@cranleigh.ae, and we will talk again after you have presented. You do need to move the slide on. Just let me know, Kate, and I will do that for you. All right, okay, we'll see you
fantastic.
on the. Thanks, Kate.
So I've rather coined the Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation. That is what we're calling this morning. And I think actually that is the perfect description of where we are at right now. So what really is going on, and what really is happening to our children online. It's a very easy one to just move over and think, oh, do you know what? They're absolutely fine. They're just doing a bit of WhatsApp. They're just playing a few games. But actually, really, what are they actually looking at? Who are they actually messaging? What actually do those messages look like on WhatsApp? So this is an opportunity for us to actually have a look at what actually is going on. We could move the slide, please, Liz. That'd be great. Okay, so this is something that has really, really taken the UK by storm. And it's a movement. Some of you might have heard of this. It's a movement called the smartphone-free childhood. I find that difficult to say as well, Liz. So this movement started by two women who had children in year 4. So they were, I think they're 9-year-olds. And what they did is they created, ironically, it was through WhatsApp. They created, actually, it started on Instagram. And they put it out there, and the messaging was, what does everyone feel about children having smartphones in primary school? And the reaction was absolutely massive. It went completely viral. And this campaign has taken the UK by storm. It has been all over the news. And parents have really, really got on board and have really started questioning, actually, why are we giving our children smartphones at such a young age? Why is it normal that in year 5, we have 98% of children in the UK carrying the internet in their pocket? Is that right? So people, I think particularly parents, are really questioning what where we are at with this. There's a huge campaign as well called Bring Back the Brick, which actually is, again, taken the UK by storm. And it's quite simply saying, okay, if our children need to be communicating with us, perhaps they're walking home from school, perhaps they're getting on the bus home, whatever they're doing, then can we not just give them a phone which does what a phone should do, which is simply calling and texting? Should we not be looking at that option rather than giving them an all singing and all dancing smartphone with a million apps on it? So this campaign has been really, really instrumental in igniting the conversation in the UK. I mean, the last 6 months, the conversation has been rife. And we have a town called St Albans, which is the first town, which is incredible, in the UK, that every single primary school in that town has signed a pact that there will be no smartphones in the entirety of their school. So that is between reception right the way through to year 6. So this is a real testament to the power of the parents. This is a real testament to actually people are really beginning to question the choices that we were making before. As I said prior to this, I've been doing this for a few years, and this campaign wouldn't have got any traction 4 years ago because everyone thought, you know, we need to be embracing technology, we need to be getting on with it. And now things look very, very different. The narrative looks different. So it's a really exciting time, and I think movements like this are fantastic because it's allowing parents to share conversations. Schools are getting much more skilled up on it, and I really believe that this movement will be instrumental in changing the landscape of what this is going to look like in a few years' time. Next slide, please, Liz. So, as I said earlier, I really, really empathise with parents in this situation. I really understand just how difficult this is. I have been under enormous amounts of pressure from my children to have a smartphone. And, you know, there is always that thing as a parent, you feel that if you're not doing what everyone else is doing, then maybe your child will be missing out. Maybe you're preventing them from having friends or being able to communicate with people. So I really understand the pressure here. It is not an easy one at all. And I think also it's worth mentioning that I also understand that where you guys live, you have different pressures. I understand that it's obviously incredibly hot quite a lot of the time. And so probably lots of your children, when it is so hot, are spending a lot more time inside. So therefore screens were much more likely to be more prominent. So again, there are different social pressures here as well. All I would say here is I've got the thing here that says, once you pop, you can't stop. And it's that idea that once that phone has been given, it's really hard to control what they are using and how they are using it. It is possible, but it takes it takes a lot of time and a lot of work to be able to do so. So I think there is a prevention of it, because once you have given it, it's much harder to take it away. But I also think it's realistic to say that if you have given that phone, or you are allowing them to do games, or you are allowing them to play on their iPad or whatever else it might be, then it is important that where we can, we create those boundaries, we create those rules, if you like. I'm very big on contracts, and I know that sounds, some parents find that a bit of an intense way to say it, but it's very much actually simple. You sit down with your children and you make a plan as a family. You make a plan as to what your screen time is going to look like, what they're allowed to use, what they're not allowed to use. If you do have smaller ones or even larger kids online, then I would say that, you know, by a rule of thumb, you should be checking what they are looking at, checking what they are sending, delve into those WhatsApp groups. I say that's actually a really big one, because the WhatsApp groups, I'd say that's one of the biggest things that I'm called into schools to talk about, is the language that goes on some of these groups. I'm not going to talk too much about language this morning, but it's definitely a key area that we are seeing in schools, that the language of young people has really deteriorated. And we believe there is a direct correlation between what they are doing online and how they are speaking to each other offline. So I think if we have given those phones, then we must be in a position to remember. I'm assuming most of us as parents have bought those phones, so we must make sure that we keep the power over it. This idea that we need to be in control of our tech and not our tech be in control of us. So there's a very fine line, be able to create the balance. Now I've got here, resist the pressure, and I know that's much easier said than done. What I will say here is there is power in numbers, and these packs that are being created in some of these primary schools in England have purely been able to happen because parents have really got on board with this, and they've had that dialogue and said, hang on a minute, right, so we've got kids all in year 4, all in year 5. What's our collective stance on smartphones? What do we collectively feel? You know, are we going to have those smartphone free play dates? Or are we going to say, you know, when kids come and play with each other, where they're not going to game, or when they meet up in town, they're not going to have access to their phones, or whatever else it might be. So although resisting the pressure is really difficult, I think there is this power in numbers. And if you get together as a body of parents and really think about this, then that's when we can see a shift and a change. I really believe that if people had said, you know, 6-7 months ago that there would be schools in England that had completely banned smartphones purely through the power of parents and the schools getting behind this, I think people would have laughed. And that's where we are at now. We also have a borough of London, in South London, where they've actually banned smartphones in secondary schools, which is unbelievable. And again, that came from people having these conversations and talking to each other. This is by no means an easy space, and it can be a very lonely space. So being able to talk and to share your thoughts on it is really important. And there is no childhood online. As I said earlier on in my piece, this really resonates with me. And if we actually think about what that means, I think that really says it all. That, you know, we only get one chance to be a kid. We only get one chance to play and to do whatever else we do as children. And if we are locked into another world, we are isolating ourselves and preventing our kids the opportunity to do what they should be doing. So if you don't take away anything else from this talk this morning, that little nugget, there is no childhood online, is such a key message here. Could I have the next slide, please, Liz? So I don't know whether any of you have read this absolutely fantastic book by Jonathan Haidt, The Anxious Generation. He has really trailblazed in this space. And he's actually a bit of a hero of mine because he has 100% changed the way so many people are talking about this subject. I mean, I don't think a day goes by without turning on the radio or turning on the TV where people are not talking about this subject, because we know that we have got it wrong thus far. So the 4 fundamentals, if you like, that Jonathan Haidt talks about when it comes to when we are giving or when we're allowing our children access to smartphones or even technology. And these are the things that I, without question, have seen the deterioration in schools. So we have this social deprivation, which is a really interesting concept. This whole idea that we are denying our children that ability to communicate face to face, to have those awkward conversations when friendships might have gone wrong, to be able to have that chit chat or to have that dialogue. They are losing it. Their offline worlds, if you like, are potentially getting smaller, and their online worlds are potentially getting bigger. And that doesn't really sit or bode well. I always find it very interesting when I am outside school gates picking up various children, and I see a real lack of chit chat. I see children almost muted and just staring at their phones, and not engaging with their peers or not having those conversations which are so important at the end of the day or at the beginning of the day. So I think this idea that they feel they are connected to something, but actually they are isolating themselves from the real world. And when I speak to kids, most of them will say that they way prefer communicating online and talking to their friends online. They find it sometimes really difficult to broach difficult conversations face to face. I think also when it comes to communication online, communication changes online because they feel that maybe they can get away with saying things they wouldn't necessarily say in real life. As I said before, some of the language is absolutely appalling. I was brought into a school quite recently by a headmaster to talk about WhatsApp, to talk about the language that was going on in WhatsApp. And this boy who was in year 6 had written something in this group, and it was absolutely awful. And the headmaster got wind of it and brought the boy into his study and said, right, can you read aloud what you just wrote on that WhatsApp group? And this boy was so embarrassed. And he said, no, I can't read it aloud. I can't possibly say that aloud. And it was this whole concept that he was able to say it online, but he wasn't able to say it out loud. And that's where we are at with this communication, that they have lost the boundaries of what is okay and what isn't okay. I'd say that's one of the biggest issues that we are facing. So when it comes to sleep, I'm so big on sleep, and the amount of times that I go into schools, and if I have to do a workshop the first period, the first lesson of the day, I'm dreading it because everyone is so tired. And I always say, why is everyone so tired? And when I delve a bit deeper, it always materializes that they were on their phones late at night. So we have a tired generation as well. And I think when we have devices in bedrooms, we know that behavior slightly changes at night. Interestingly, what people will say to each other slightly changes at night. And I think, I don't need to go into the importance of sleep, but yeah, for youngsters, sleep is so important. So where we can, and I appreciate this is really difficult, but I think where we can, no one should be sleeping with devices in their bedrooms. And I think that goes to us as well, as adults, as parents. We should try and make sure that we model our behavior. So devices out of bedrooms would be a very good place to start. And that can be something that you can do as a family. So there's been a lot of research also into attention spans. So many teachers have mentioned to me that they have noticed that the kids are not able to concentrate as long as they used to. They are a bit scatty. They're not able to focus. And again, there's been quite a lot of research into this. And if you look at what these kids are watching online and how quickly everything is moving, if you look onto TikTok and the quickness of their of the clips, they are unable now to concentrate on something. If you put a film on for year 8 and year 9, I can be sure as it they will not be able to watch it without bringing out their phone or double screening or triple screening, whatever else they're doing. So the attention span is definitely changing, which I think is actually really, really quite scary. And again, something that we really need to be thinking about. The addiction side of it, as I said, the statistics are absolutely huge. And I think if we were very honest to ourselves about how much we need our phones and how terrifying it is when we think we might have lost our phones, we are all, I'd say, addicted to our phones. They have been designed, these phones, these apps, to suck us in. I always say there is a reason why the guys who design these apps do not allow their children anywhere near them, because of how addicted they are. So the guys in Silicon Valley, they send their children to tech-free schools. So that is just the example that we should all be thinking of. I mean, I know that I have found myself dipping onto Instagram, and before I know it, I've been scrolling for for half an hour, maybe an hour. So I think about for the kids, it is a whole new world out there, and the addiction levels are really, really high. So that is, again, something that we need to be monitoring. Again, if those phones have been given, or your kids have iPads or are gaming, gaming is another one where we see lots of addictions. actually in London, I think there's 2 gaming addiction clinics that have been opened because gaming became such a huge problem during lockdown. So I think when if technology has been given and we are worried about the addiction side of it, then again, it's making sure that we have those boundaries, those clear boundaries in place as to when our children are able to access their technology. I think if it's no boundaries, then the addiction levels are more likely to creep in. So creating those rules, creating those contracts, and also, like with all these things, being mindful of how we use our technology in front of our children. So many kids that I speak to will say, "Oh my goodness, my mum's always on her phone. My dad's always on his phone when we're having dinner together. They're permanently attached to their phones. When they pick me up, they're on their phones." So I think, we have to model this ourselves. If we expect our children to behave a certain way, we also have to think about how we are using technology around them. I think that's really important for us to kind of get on board with as well. Could I have the next slide, please, Liz? So there has been so many arguments around this. And, when it comes to the decline of mental health for our youngsters, and I think it is without question there has been a decline. The critics would say that it's due to young people being more potentially open about their mental health, more able to talk about their mental health. Others might suggest that it's due to the fact that we are living in quite a difficult world and many youngsters feel the weight of it on their shoulders, which I do see an argument to. But I think really the realities and the statistics suggest that, once those smartphones became more prominent in our children's lives, that is where we saw an increasingly big mental health spike. From my work in schools, it is without question that depression levels are rising. Anxiety is huge. I think also there's a big issue, if you like, with a loss of identity, a lack of identity amongst our youngsters, because so many young people are spending so much time online comparing themselves to other people, and thinking, "Oh my goodness, I wish I looked a bit like that, or I wish I was good as that, or I wish my life was as glamorous as that, or as brilliant as that." And actually, they have got a real lack of a purpose in who they are, and a lack of understanding of what they like and what they don't like, because they are spending their times constantly comparing themselves. And I think that's a big difference to the way I grew up, which is the way many of us, I'm sure, grew up. We didn't spend our time looking at other people and thinking that we wanted to be like them. So I think that has definitely increased the issues that we are seeing with mental health. This idea as well, which is really fascinating, and Jonathan Haidt does really go into this in the book, as to how our use of technology has really shifted the way we parent our children. This whole concept that we have given them so much freedom in their online worlds, but so little freedom in their offline worlds. And I think that's a really interesting thing to think about. Children are, we are, as parents, we're too scared to let our children perhaps walk to the local shops, or go and play in the park, or go and explore things themselves, because we are too worried about the world in which they are living in. And actually, that's a very important part of their development, that they have these experiences, that they are able to take a bit more responsibility for themselves. We are really noticing that the irony in all of this is that the maturity level of children is actually going down. We have a generation of kids who are quite potentially a bit surly, and a bit immature, and not able to take responsibility for themselves. So I think that's something that it's slightly looked over, but we should be really thinking about. And this whole idea of loss of play, this is fascinating. I think our children are losing that ability to do those make-believe games, to play dens, just to be kids, just to be silly. You look at what play dates look like now. I mean, what do play dates look like? They look like 3 kids huddled around a screen. They look like looking at TikTok, trying to do TikTok dances. They don't really look like running around outside or making things or being silly or make-believe games. That's far and few between now. And the loss of play is so important for the development of our children. And that, I'm afraid, is massively being lost by this obsession, real obsession with technology. So I think we are definitely in a mental health crisis, and I think it is fair to say that there is a real correlation between excess use of technology and how it affects our mental health. I always say to parents that, being a young person is hard enough as it is. You've got hormones, you've got all sorts of things going on. You're trying to work out who you are. You've got friendships. You've got everything develops at such a rate, and actually, putting in that technology, putting in that smartphone has only made things more complicated for them, has really made their lives, has added a layer, if you like, to their lives, which I don't necessarily feel that they need. I think also it's important to mention here, and it's something that is not as widely talked about as it should be, that all our children are obviously all different. And not all children will behave the same on social media or on their technology. So if you decide, or when your child is of age and you think, right, this is the time they are allowed to have a smartphone, or they are allowed to sign on to social media or whatever else it might be, make those decisions for your child, for your individual child, and don't just do that because they are of age, because each child will behave very differently on social media than the other child. I look at my 3 boys and they're all completely different. And I know one of them will be an absolute nightmare and one of them probably won't be that fussed by it. So making sure that we are in control of when we make those decisions is really, really important. One thing I would also mention is that those children who are more resilient offline tend to be the children who are more resilient online. We also would recommend, where possible, if, for example, your child is having a difficult time or is, not feeling their best for whatever reason, as we know, it goes like this, doesn't it, when they are growing up, that would be a time where we would say to remove as much technology as you can, because things can go wrong online when your child isn't feeling their best, because they might start exploring other things or things they wouldn't necessarily be looking at because of how they're feeling. So really, again, it's about engaging in the space if you are giving that technology, and remembering that we as parents really need to be in control of what they're looking at and when they're looking at it. Can I go to the next slide, please, Liz? So I'm going to just end with this, and this is really interesting, and I think probably if you've got boys and girls or whatever your children makeup might be, I think it's there is a massive difference on the whole how boys behave to how girls behave, and there's quite a lot of research in Jonathan Haidt's book that suggests this. Girls, as he calls them, are the super users. So girls are much more likely to become obsessed with those visually orientated apps. So for example, if you ask a 14-year-old girl, they will all absolutely love, they'll be all over Instagram, they will love their TikTok. They are much more interested in the visual side of it, what they're going to look like. They would much more and more lean towards doing the comparisons than the boys. And the boys, again, this is a generalization, but the boys, we see much more problem with the gaming, potentially more problem with the language. I mean, some of the language, as I said before, coming out of some of these young people, particularly boys, is truly, truly shocking. And I think when it comes to boys, we need to be protecting boys in a slightly different way than we need to be protecting girls. But I think it is interesting that they will be using things in a different way. Girls, the friendship issues online with girls can get really, really nasty. And again, I think with the boys, there's a lot of toxic language that is being used. There's huge amounts of misogyny that takes place online, which boys are kind of getting on board with. And I know that can be a huge problem within schools. So there's a knock-on effect. But yeah, there's definitely a discrepancy between the way boys and girls are using their technology. So that was a sort of, and if you like, a synopsis, the beginning of a sort of, it's a very in-depth conversation, this, and I'm hoping that we could perhaps explore language and the impact that language is having, and also go into more detail about the impact that communication can be having, potentially in our next talk. But there's a kind of overview, if you like, of where we are at. But before I end this, I really want to say that, you know, we are in a hopeful time. I don't want this to be all doom and gloom, but we do really need to really think about how we are using our technology, and we really need to think about the impact that technology potentially could be having on our children, because it's all about keeping our children safe and keeping them happy, and actually enabling them to flourish. And I, as I said, I really understand and recognize how difficult it is when we are all so busy, and it's so easy just to be, you know, throwing them technology there and there because we've all got so many other things to do. But I think we need to really stop and have a think about the impact that might be having. Anyway, I hope some of that was useful this morning. Thank you so much for listening. And yeah, any questions, do fire away. I'm more than happy to answer them if I can. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kate. That was fabulous. And a really good sort of, you know, quick run through of what's going on and what's being said. So thank you for that. I'm trying to read the book. I just haven't quite found the time to finish it all. So that was brilliant. Thank you. We have got a number of questions, so I don't want to talk too much, but a couple of things you said, like, and you didn't mention the word, but I actually felt really sad listening for some of that. I've got a 15-year-old daughter. You know, I'm on either end of the spectrum here with, you know, a son who is going through this. You know, I don't want him to have a phone, but also knowing that, you know, I've kind of missed the boat a little bit there with my daughter, who might be a bit of a guinea pig. And the idea of missing out, you know, that FOMO. I mean, FOMO wasn't even a thing, and we didn't know about not being invited to the birthday parties, and now the kids know everything that's going on. And that added layer that you mentioned, I think is so important. And you also said as well, you know, people would have laughed if they thought that, you know, here we are when you started doing these talks, but this is how the world is changed, isn't it? Through a group of people who are invested in something, who believe in it, and who want to make a difference. And I really hope that shines through when you're listening to this, is that, you know, we are all on board with trying to give back to our children the childhood that they shouldn't be having online. So a couple of questions. I've had a parent email in 2 questions, and I think it is probably something, if you haven't read the book, that we need to talk about. What age would you suggest, or would the research suggest, is okay to give a smartphone to your child?
Oh, do you know what? This is a really interesting one. And I think we've also got to make the discrepancy between, there's a difference between when we give the smartphone and when we give social media. So Jonathan Haidt would say secondary school for a smartphone but being heavily monitored. And he would say 16 for social media. So secondary
school will be 11, 12 for our, because we have a prep system. Okay. I'm just going to bring Stephen in, because I'm not sure if he can hear the conversation. Obviously, we're going to be asking him some questions too. Sorry, Stephen, leaving the background there. So 11 for a phone, as in a brick?
Yes. Well, I mean, again, you know, this space is massively changing. I mean, I think 11 for a brick, and he said, 16 for social media. But I think that the main takeaway really is that there should not be phones in primary school level, no smartphones and no brick phones in that primary school level, because actually it's completely and utterly unnecessary for them to be having access to what they're having access to. So I think they're the key messaging. And I think, you know, as I said, this space is this is moving all the time. And I think that the age restrictions actually will increase to 16 for lots of social media. I think Instagram are about to change. I think it will massively change. One thing I'd say to parents is, you know, those age restrictions that are currently on apps are there for a reason. And it's so easy to, you know, jump on board because, oh, everyone else has got this, so therefore off we go. And actually, you know, some of the content that is flying around some of these apps, if you go on them, I mean, if you go and have a look at TikTok, it is absolutely appalling. So I think it's really important that we do look at those age restrictions, and we do understand, and we also educate our children as to why they are there. Totally. And I mean, WhatsApp is a very interesting one because WhatsApp is actually 16. And, you know, many people don't know that. And many people give their children WhatsApp before anything else. And, you know, as I said, if you have seen some of these conversations and some of these group chats that happen and some of the memes that are flying around and some of the content that flies around on WhatsApp, you know, I think as parents, you think twice about it. One thing I would say is that, you know, if your children are using WhatsApp, you know, make them aware that, you know, you will be checking their phone, because I think as soon as they know that there might be someone looking at it, they might take a little bit more responsibility for what they're saying, maybe. But yeah, I'd say 16 really for social media, and then you know, smartphones really should just be a little bit behind that, if not at the same age, actually.
Okay. And the same parents actually asked the question, how long per day? I mean, that's a difficult question, isn't it? Like,
yeah, it's a really, really difficult question. And also there has to be, you know, because screen time, obviously kids do homework on screen. So there's going to be a difference between your screen time and your social media use and your gaming use. There's 3 separate things there. I mean, you know, social media, I don't think the kids really should be doing more than an hour of any of that stuff at all, because the addiction levels will be high. They'll be getting sucked into it. I mean, you know, as parents, you can do an experiment. You know, you do that kind of, okay, there's your gaming time. And then when you say, okay, you've got 10 minutes to go, I guarantee you'll get a bit of backlash. Even if you've set the guidelines, they're going to be annoyed because they don't want to come offline. So, you know, the shorter the better, really, on that. And also, I would really, where we can, be avoiding using these kind of sites at bedtime before they go to bed, and out, you know, and really not keeping those devices in bedrooms, because we know that behavior at night dramatically decreases, and they behave in a more risky way. They'll say things that they would never normally say in real life. So
devices out of rooms,
devices out of bedrooms actually would save a lot of headache for everyone, and obviously we get that proper sleep in, and I think that is a very key way actually of protecting our children, is to keep them, you know, your screen time stocks at 7 or 8 or whatever, and then you have your downtime, you read a book, and then that's your calming level. And if we can, try and avoid the picking up the phone in the morning or picking up the console in the morning before school. I appreciate that sometimes very difficult, but you know, it's just being able to have that chit chat with our kids, with our family. And that's the thing that I've really noticed, and families have really sort of mentioned, it's that, you know, it can be quite muted. No one's talking, you know, and those chit chats, those little relaxed chit chats are where you really find out about what's going on with your kids. You're not going to get it if you say, how was your day? Because they're going to go fine. They're not going to, you know, so having those little bits of communication where we can is so important.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. I'm going to ask Stephen, there's a question really that I think is directed more at us as a school. Sorry, it's just on my email that's come through that says, I've lost it now. I understand Cranleigh do not permit prep school students to have their phones in school. Yet some parents still send the kids with them. How can we explain to our children? I mean, you know, how do we remedy this? How do we explain to our children without making them feel excluded from their peers? I suppose in a way, it's what are we doing as a school to try and promote this?
Yeah, absolutely. And Liz, I'll get to the answering of that in a second. I just wanted to also start by saying, Kate, thank you so much for all that information. I too sat here like Liz as a parent, but also as the head of pastoral for the prep school. But as a parent, just kind of, you know, those little nod moments of, I recognize that. So thank you, really, really powerful. I do want to go into kind of what we're seeing in the prep school, some of the things that you did mention. But Liz, I'll answer the question to say, I think it goes back to Kate's point that she made of power in numbers. As soon as it becomes okay in some households for schools for phones, to still go into school, then it becomes difficult for us to enforce. So in the newsletter, we periodically put into the news, the parent newsletter, that school does not allow any smartphones whatsoever. And our rule is, if a child is found with a smartphone at school or has a smartphone out in school, that will be taken away, switched off, and is for collection by the parents on Friday afternoon at the end of the week. And that is something that we enforce really strictly, because we are so against smartphones being in our school. If I can, Liz, are you okay for me to move on to some of the behaviour that we're seeing into school?
Yeah, I think it's around language, Stephen, isn't it? I know Kate mentioned it, something we've had a talk about as well many times, about the language the children are seeing. It may be as a result of this conversation we have another talk with Kate about that specifically, but yeah, tell us what you've been seeing.
So I would say weekly I'm getting screenshots from parents with the actual language. Kate, you mentioned the story of the child who was asked to read the WhatsApp conversation. I've had similar instances at our own school, and you cannot believe the absolute desensitization that's taken place because our children are exposed continuously on these social media apps. I've seen screenshots from TikTok, from WhatsApp, even just from iMessenger, where these groups are formed, and as soon as children are in groups, they seem to pack, and they seem to just make it okay to comment on appearance. But also we're seeing the normalization of hate speech, and we even see it then coming into school, where the way children speak to each other. We had an unfortunate circumstance where I had a conversation about why a child was talking to another child that way. And it was girls and young girls speaking about that it's normal for them to call each other the B word, and that's just the way they speak to each other. And similarly with our older boys in year 7 and 8, using the N word just as a way to address each other. So that normalization of that really offensive, really derogatory language is something that is really has me concerned. Some other things is, I go back to the point that Kate made, there's no childhood online. Once that content has been seen, it has been seen, and there's no going back on that. The negative content that we're seeing into school continuously, and even being airdropped onto school devices is what's happening as well. So it's really, really scary, the sharing of that's been going on, and also the behavior imitation. So some of the YouTubers that have kind of really popular among some of our boys, some of the behavior that we're seeing, which is imitated on that. But then also, you talk about the gaming with our boys, really, really scary. That's all they want to talk about, and it's all they do talk about. The loss of imagination and the loss of playing. Our children at breaks and lunches, sometimes, I know we're indoors now, but the games they're playing are sometimes very often based on the real life video game. So it's really, really scary. So those are just some of the things. But yeah, were there any other questions, Liz, that have come through that we can address?
Yeah, I think just one again, Kate. I know we're short on time here, and I do think it's really important that everyone listening realizes that this is not the end of this for us as a school. That we are listening to you. That we are really invested in what we do next. I know there's a chat going on. I've got a really, really invested parent. I'm going to meet with her in a few moments as well to look at what we do next. We're talking about how we get together with other schools in the group of schools we're in. How we get to to take our education bodies to say, as a school, look, this is something we want you to take action on. If they can take action on this from a more governmental authority perspective as well, that would be really helpful. There is a question. I don't know how to answer this. How do you prevent the feeling of missing out if the child is the only one without a phone? What do we do?
It is unbelievably difficult, and as I said, I'm facing that at the moment. I think the way I approach that is actually, you've got to stick to your guns. It's difficult. You've got to stick to your guns. And this is when the power in numbers massively help, because actually, we must remember that our child might say, I'm the only one. but are they actually the only one? There's always that element to it. And I think, you know, we have to be having those honest conversations with our kids, quite frankly, as to why we are making these decisions, and the reasoning behind them, because they need to get on board with this, because ultimately they need to be the ones that actually go, they need to be thinking about this themselves rather than us just telling them what they should be doing, because this is a space that, you know, they will have to navigate at some point. So they will have to understand at some point. And you know, that is a really, really difficult question. And, you know, you're not going to be able to we can't get that completely right. There's always going to be moments when our children feel how unfair, I'm missing out on that, I'm missing out on that. But having those conversations are important. And that's why I really believe, as I said at the beginning of this, that this 360 approach is the best approach, because engaging the parents, engaging the teachers, but we have to be talking to the kids about it and actually getting them to have these conversations, getting them to think, oh, hang on a minute, God, maybe it is a bit strange if I'm always with my friends and we're not talking, we're always going, you know, looking around a screen. You know, maybe I do want to maybe not have those tech-free play dates, because actually it's more fun when we're running around and chatting to each other. So engaging the kids in this is really important. And, you know, we've seen this happen in the UK in many schools. I mean, actually, funny enough, in Cranleigh, in the school, your sister school in England, you know, we had a really interesting conversation with some year 8 girls, and they decided collectively that when they were going out into town together, that they were going to put those smartphones away, because they said, actually, it's really boring because no one really talks to each other anymore. And actually, it's quite nice when we're out having you know, when they're going to Starbucks or whatever, we miss having those chats. So they collectively, through talking about it and through opening up the dialogue, thought, actually, yeah, we haven't got this quite right. So I think it really, really important, I would say, we've got to be explaining to the children why we are making these decisions, because otherwise they'll just go, oh, boring, you don't know what you're talking about. So
we all grew up with our parents saying no. We all thought it was there. This isn't new. Half of, you know, I still remember being that awful teenager, you know, that my mum sort of laughs about, because, you know, and we didn't even have that. I didn't have that until I was 18. So there was other things, at what time you were allowed home, what everyone else was doing. It's the same story, isn't it? It's the same narrative. It's just about a different thing. And I think strength in numbers, I think one thing we're going to look at, you know, Stephen and I will be talking about how we're not necessarily asking parents to pledge, but if we can share some of the parents, get a way so that parents can actually share with us, you know, if you're in year 5 and I'm in year 5 and our kids aren't going to have smartphones, how do we say, well, such a body hasn't got one either? You're not the only one. And I think that's we can do. We are looking at our policies as well. We've got new policies coming in around student protection, around all of these things, well-being. So we are looking at how we implement them from the authorities into our policies here at Cranleigh as well. There's a huge piece of work going on with that. And I think as well, I know you're talking to Cranleigh UK next week. You're going in. I think it would be good to connect our schools as well, and let's try and be a school in the UK, in the UAE, who is leading on this, who is making. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And you've got to go. You've got other things to do today. So have a lovely day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
We will be in touch on the newsletter. I'll just take you out. Okay. We will be in touch on the newsletter towards the end of this week, Stephen. I know we've got a face-to-face parent meeting that we're going to have around this. That's our next stage. We've just been waiting with, obviously, the announcement of Eid-al-Adha break. So we're just putting that in. We'll pop that onto the newsletter. And let's, make some steps forward to try to keep our children safe and
absolutely
working there.
And I think kind of the last thought from me is wouldn't it be great if we were the St. Albans of the Middle East? Wouldn't it be great if we could get this kind of movement going forward, so that it was normalized for children of this age to not have a smartphone? We need to get the reverse of what we're currently seeing, and we need to be celebrating that and pushing that forward, because it is our children and we only get one go at their childhood. So I think that we do need to be promoting this, because we are seeing the evidence now that this is not what they should be doing. So, I mean, I'm all for bringing back the brick, but I'm all for actually, there's no good reason for your child having a smartphone in primary or prep. There's absolutely no good reason.
If there's a problem with your child, we will let you know. The nurses will call you. They can use the phone at reception if they need to, if they've forgotten their PE kit, the things that we went through at school. There is no need for a child to have a phone in school. I think actually sometimes it's more damage, when they know they can message mom or do all of those things, actually it can make it worse. So Brilliant. Thank you for joining me today, Stephen. And
Thanks very much.
to Kate for that. And if you're listening online, like I've said, thank you for joining us today, however you're listening to this. And let's keep moving this movement forward so that we can keep our children safe. All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liz.